here. It's just that we can only talk to the people who aren't on the fringes because those people won't even tune in.
But I do think that people who do deal in this currency often ignore the deeper and sometimes more powerful currents that also pull people. I mean, I mentioned this in the War on the West, but consider the extraordinary extent to which, say, irrational resentment can power a person's life. Resentment is one of the deepest human instincts, human emotions. If you live a life caught up in resentment, that can drive you. I mean, it'll drive you to hell, but I mean, it'll drive you. That person has something I don't. There must be a reason why he's got it and I don't. These people, I mean, going back to the Israel thing, that's a very powerful thing in the Middle East, in particular neighboring Arab countries, which is how come this country has a tiny percent of our population, tiny percent of the amount of land we have, and has made a much more successful economy and civil society from it, and it's got religious freedom that we don't, or whatever, whichever way you want to do it. Mm-hmm. One explanation for the extraordinary anti-Israel animus in the region is that people often feel resentment against their neighbor if their neighbor is doing better. Mm-hmm. And that you can't just reason somebody out of that.
Yeah.
Because they weren't reasoned into it.
Yes, there's a quote like, never try to reason somebody out of a belief they emotioned.
It's Jonathan Swift, Irish secularist, can never try to reason somebody out of a position they weren't reasoned into.
Yeah, that's not, there it is. Yeah, I love that. But of course, the uncomfortable truth is he nailed that one, right? And it's like, how do we fix or get rid of some of these ideologies? I mean, are there risks when democracies fight such ideologies? I mean, we have proportionality that we're worried about now, civilian casualties, things like that. You do mention this in the book. I'm curious what you think.
Oh, those are profound questions which all Western armies have to deal in. People like to do extrapolation out of civilian death tolls and so on, and it's pretty hard to go into that for most people without sounding in some way heartless, but war is a terrible force, and inevitably innocent civilians die once a war is going on. There are rules of engagement that the Israeli Defense Forces, like the American Army, the British Army, engage in. There's a certain, I mean, again, this is something so obvious that it has to be said. The IDF, the IAF do not just carpet bomb Gaza, because if they did, they would be failing to hit the Hamas terrorists that they want, and they'd be killing a lot of Gazans who they have no interest in killing. They don't want to. I've become slightly jaded about this particular part of the argument, because I realise that there are people who just don't want to hear that, because they've imbibed for almost 2 years now the claim that the Israelis are deliberately committing genocide, or that indeed they were committing genocide before the 7th of October in Gaza, which I mean it's all preposterous as a claim. One of the, again, going back to the reason thing, is why do so many people seem to want that to be the case? And I say that carefully. I think a lot of people do want that to be the case. I just saw yesterday a big protest that was happening in Amsterdam yesterday against Israel. So let me throw it out there. Why might the Dutch want to accuse the one Jewish state of genocide? It's not hard to work out psychologically.
Right.
If you've been brought up in Amsterdam and you've passed Anne Frank's house many times and you've taken around it, and you know that your forebears collaborated, failed to stand up to Nazi fascism, and colluded to a very great extent in the deportation and murder of the Jews of that country. Yeah, you would love it to have the opportunity to accuse the Jewish state of genocide, because then everyone's done genocide and we can be let off in the Netherlands. And that's a very significant driver for some people. In the same way, again, going back to the thing that's beyond reason, it seems that there are a lot of people who don't have very much or I mean, I don't want to be needlessly insulting, seek purpose and meaning in their life. They want a grand story to be a part of. And they, particularly some young people, the stats show that in America and the wider West, have decided to hitch themselves to a big cause. And the big cause that some of them have decided to hitch themselves to is the cause of Palestinianism, and then down the road from that, the cause of Hamas, Hezbollah, and so on. It seems to give them purpose. It certainly gives them something to do. They get the great opportunity of saying, you know, no one will be free until this happens. And I think that's delusional, but again, it's understandable. There are significant numbers of people, evidently, clearly, in our societies in the West who deeply lack meaning in their lives and wish to attach themselves to things that seem meaning-filled. And the great cause of liberation, for instance, liberation of oppressed people, is a cause. And unfortunately, significant numbers of people have decided to attach themselves to the anti-Israel cause in the belief that that is a cause on the side of people who need liberation, of course, assisted by white people in the West who would normally be accused of either colonialist thinking or of white savior complex. But as we know, again, those charges don't happen if they go in a certain direction.
Right, yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. I found that something else that was quite interesting. I've been to Egypt before a long time ago. I've been to Israel before. I've been to Gaza before the year 2000, before all this.
Before the withdrawal.
Before the withdrawal. And when I was in Gaza, I found it to be, I was staying with a lovely family. The father worked for the Palestinian Authority, but they had a Hamas flag in their house that was up on the wall. I had my own floor because they didn't want the girls in the house to see me without my shirt on and stuff. And the brothers had their own room and another floor, and the parents had their own floors. Quite a nice house, and the roof was open. We'd all hang out on the roof at night and eat these giant trays of olives and all this stuff. It was quite memorable. And I remember asking if I could take a picture of the guy holding the Hamas flag, because I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was an interesting looking flag, and I thought it was and then the brother said, no, don't take a photo of it. And I said, why? He said, well, my dad worked for the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas is like the other political party. And I said, well, how do you have both flags? How can your dad work for that? Is he going to get mad if you... No, my dad knows that he's secretly... We're pro-Hamas, he works for the PA, and I found that to be really confusing. Although it made way more sense, of course, over the last 25 years, learned quite a bit about this. And the idea that you could be sort of complicit in one but secretly rooting for the other was very, very common.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that it was never anything that went wrong. I mean anything. Like I remember one of the brothers stubbed his toe, and he said something, and I said, why do you say, what is that word? Because I thought he was swearing in Arabic. And the sister goes, oh, he said, damn Jews. And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, oh, he says that whenever he like drops something, kicks something. And I said, does everyone say that? And he said, no, it's kind of, we do, but not everybody. There's other words to swear in Arabic. And then there was a bad smell one day because the windows changed, and they said, oh, it's the wastewater treatment plant. Usually it blows that way, and then it blows this way, but we want it to blow towards the Jews. And my friend Natanya, who was Jewish and friends with these people, that's how I got to go there in the first place, she was like, can you stop doing that? You know, it's making me uncomfortable. We're Jewish too. And they were like, it's so hard to break these habits because this is how everyone talks. And that was shocking to me. I had a Hebrew textbook because I was learning Hebrew, and they said, can you put that away? It's offensive. And I was like, it's just Hebrew language. And the one brother was like, it's fine. I'll help you with your homework. I speak Hebrew too. But he and my brother and my dad and my mom, they all got offended by just even seeing that. And that to me is like, it just really signifies how much hatred there was. If you can't even see, imagine your country's at war with Iraq and you see Arabic written on a menu in New York and you storm out of the place. Sir, what's wrong? I can't believe there's Arabic on this menu. I mean, at some point it's like you got to get it together. How do you function? If your entire life is grievance, how do you get anything done?
Well, you don't.
You don't.
You don't. You spend your time trying to bring down the person who you think is causing you all these problems in your life. And again, as I quoted in The War in the West, as Nietzsche famously says in The Genealogy of Morals, when you're in that position, you do need somebody to stand over your life and say, you're right, there is somebody holding you back, there is somebody who's destroying your life, the person is you.
Yeah.
Not many people want to audition for the role of saying that to people, let alone who Gazans in the 2000s.
Well, ironically, these kids, the reason we were able to go there, my friend knew her because my friend Natanya was this woman's floor mate in a university in the United States where all of them had gone to school. So they were educated in the U.S., from Gaza, from Rafah. So this isn't even like, well, they've never seen anything outside of their little city. They've never seen they've never had any advantages. No, they had passports. They vacationed in London and New York.
Yeah, that doesn't necessarily inoculate you to hatreds.
No, I thought that was really interesting because my whole life had been taught the more you're exposed to things, the more everyone gets along.
I remember,
Remember those days?
I remember speaking to somebody from the PA in Ramallah many years ago when I was there, who explained to me that, he'd studied at the London School of Economics, and he came back in order to pursue his fantasy of anti-Israelism, having spent, 3 years in London. And as it happened, he swam in warm enough waters at the London School of Economics, but again, we seem to have an idea or presumption, which maybe we both had at some point, that if not now, that Western societies can inoculate people to irrational bigotries. Mm-hmm. That's clearly not true. Mm-hmm. It's clearly not true. It may work with some people, but there'll be a lot of people who it makes no difference to at all.
One strange tension, I wanted to ask you this because I'd never gotten an answer to this. When I was in Egypt, people really hated Israelis. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was like, hey, what are you guys doing here? Are you tourists? Oh, yeah, I'm studying in Israel, and I came here on a trip. And they're like, oh, okay, well, you should say Palestine because, Anyway, let's go to this bar, and they serve alcohol, and I don't drink, but I know you guys probably do, and we can play pool. I mean, that was the conversations I was having. And I remember that I was talking with someone, and I said, why is everyone still so angry about Israel? Is it because you lost the war in 1973? And the guy goes, what are you talking about? And I said, the 1973 war. You lost. Is everyone, like, why is everyone... We didn't lose. And I'm thinking, wow, you might want to watch the movie again, pal.
As you know, I tell a very similar story in my book. I had exactly the same experience.
That was what flagged it for me. Because I was like, oh my gosh, this wasn't just an isolated incident.
No. They think they won the Six-Day War.
Yeah. I mean, you have Google. We had Google. We had Google back then. We had history books back then. What the hell?
Again, our presumption is that if you introduce somebody to the facts, their mind will change. Unfortunately, that is the case with some people, but by no means the case with everybody.
Yeah. Egypt was both phenomenal and scary at the same time.
It's a good description of the country.
Amazing place. People kind of all over the map, really. I mean, there was a waiter that I loved. We were in Dahab. There's a beachside cafe. Have you ever been down there? There's like pillows all over the beach and these little kind of restaurants, and you just sit there and you order food, and like 3 hours later it comes, but you don't care if you're on a vacation and you're looking at the ocean, right? And I remember this waiter was such a nice guy. He was always giving us free stuff. He was like, try the mango shake. I know you ordered those watermelon, whatever it was. I'm bringing you this, my favorite thing today. Wouldn't let us order. Took half the things off the bill. Just a really nice guy. And on the last day, he goes, oh, there's Israelis back there. I put the poison in the food so they're gonna puke and shit everywhere. And I was like, what? And he goes, yeah, they're gonna be so sick in about 20 minutes. Just watch. And I was like, I can't. I have to tell them. And he's like, don't tell them. What's wrong with you? I thought we were friends. I'm like, I can't let you poison somebody at the table behind me because they're Jewish. Like, what are you doing? So I told them, and they left, and the guy was like really upset and chasing after. Oh, I didn't mean it. I was just kidding. I don't think he was. But it was so hard to... It was confusing for me, right? Because he knew we were Jewish and we were studying in Israel, and it wasn't a problem. It was nice to us the whole week. 2 Israelis walk in. Hey, I poisoned those 2 Israelis behind you. Set your watch. 20 minutes. They're going to be...
I mean, it's one of the tragedies, in my view, of much of the Arab world, that instead of developing their own societies, they've So the leaders of many of the countries have successfully diverted their populations onto hating Israel because there is no way to improve their own socioeconomic state.
Yeah. That makes sense.
It's sad for the Israelis, but it's a disaster for the Arab world.
I just never experienced anything. Look, coming from Michigan, I'd never experienced anything like that. That's why it stuck with me for a quarter of a century. But a lot of it was never really explainable until recently. And reading books like yours and thinking like, oh, okay, now that we're being bombarded with the information about this conflict and its history, a lot of this makes a little bit more sense. I want to ask, and this is a loaded question and a leading one, so I'll admit that at first. Why does proportionality only seem to apply to Israel? And I don't want to go back to World War II for examples or anything like that, but like, I've never heard, I don't even think I'd heard the word proportionality until this conflict. No one seems to really worry about it.
Oh no, it's been an obsessive term used in every conflict involving Israel for at least this century. Every Gaza conflagration before this last 2 years, the 2006 Lebanon war, it's always been proportionality. First of all, I mean, it's in some ways it's understandable. In one way, it's understandable. A lot of people who don't know anything about the conflict or about the region, or indeed about warfare in general, may have the presumption that your side had 1,200 people killed. You're allowed to retaliate up to the level of the same number on the other side. And if you go beyond that, it's disproportionate. Now, this is, to say this is elementary as a sort of ethical or moral or strategic understanding is to vastly understate the matter. But there are some people who do say like that, or let's go further along it, who think, although they might not be able to say exactly where the level is, they think they would know what a disproportionate response looked like if they saw it. There is a bit of obsession about it whenever it involves Islam. And the most obvious example I would give is when ISIS in the 2010s were rampaging across Iraq and Syria and successfully carrying out mass casualty terror attacks in Europe, particularly most notably in France in 2015. The French government, the Swiss government, the American government, others decided to go in and destroy ISIS. We were very reluctant in all of our countries to put boots on the ground. That's the great thing everyone was always discussing. Are we going to put boots on the ground? And there was a recognition among all these countries that they didn't want to get dragged into that. So all of our countries did considerable aerial campaigns, bombing places like Mosul, where ISIS were governing. And they also, we also used our Kurdish allies, Peshmerga and others, to be the front phalanx of the ground campaign. There were some special forces assistance, but it was mainly the fighting front of the Kurds. We just don't know how many civilians were killed. We just don't know. Tens of thousands for sure.
We don't know because we decided not to count? Is that kind of why?
Nobody counted because nobody frankly cared. They wanted to stop people going into music concerts in Paris and slaughtering people by the hundreds. So, and ISIS were Hamas-like, very similar Islamist ideology and theology. And we decided that the priority was destroying ISIS. There are some people who have a problem with that, but I don't think very many people do. And although the so-called anti-war movements in the West tend to be pro-war but pro the other side winning as long as it's not us or our allies, occasionally we'll talk about that. But that issue did not close down major cities in the US or shut down capital cities in Europe week after week. So my question always on that is just so why is it that the case with Israel? And I think there are very deep reasons. In fact, you saw them by the 8th of October when the massacre was still going on in the south of Israel, when Hamas was still, and other terrorists were all still rampaging through the country. The world's media turned on the 8th of October onto the how is Israel going to take revenge? I think that's a very deep substrate in our societies, which is the idea of the vengeful Jews, the vengeful Jewish state, an eye for an eye, all that sort of thing. It's very, you see it even in reputable media like Private Eye, there's Turtle magazine in the UK. They all fall into that. The BBC, all these media of different sides fall into that trope. And by the way, of course, there is there's an added oddity to that, which is not just, as I've seen in my own eyes, the considerable efforts that the Israelis go to stop excessive civilian casualties. And I mean, there are people who've done studies on this, and I find it persuasive that yes, the Israelis have been as targeted as they can be in an extremely difficult battle situation. But I have noticed the number of people who seem not to realize, among other things, that because Israel is so small and its landmass so small and its population so small compared to basically any of its neighbors, it would be understandable if they acted disproportionately, although they don't in civilian numbers terms. But it would be understandable if they couldn't take the one-to-one ratio of you kill one of ours, we kill one of yours. Because very swiftly its neighbors would work out that you can destroy Israel very easily.
Right.
Very easy.
9 million? Well, we're willing to sacrifice 9 million. You know.
And it's not like it's not, and this hasn't happened repeatedly. No, I mean, some people listening may know this, others may not. But I mean, what is the first thing that happens after the State of Israel is declared in 1948? All its neighbors invade and try to strangle it at birth. When the population of Israel is about 800,000 people, many of whom had just survived World War II. So, and of course, there were more attempts in the next decades, 67, 73, the Intifadas, and then October the 7th. It's not like there can be much trust from the Israeli side that people in the region do not want to annihilate and strangle and destroy the country wholesale. And again, it's what I describe as the unbelievable presumptuousness of people who've been born in societies like the one we're sitting in, and born in peace, into a society which, for all the problems we have, we live in peace. There's such presumptuousness of people who think they know what they would do in a state of war. They don't. They've no damn idea.
Yeah, that's a common argument that I see from people is, I would do this and this and this. Dude, you live in Ohio. You are in no danger. Michigan is not going to invade anytime soon.
But this has been a perennial for a long time. You mentioned 9/11 earlier. I remember when Osama bin Laden was finally killed in Abbottabad in Pakistan. There was such outrage in the non-American Western media that the Navy SEALs had killed bin Laden and that they had failed to catch him alive, and then, having failed to catch him alive and killing him, had buried him at sea with the risk that he had not been given a full and proper and decent Islamic burial. Okay, now that is wild. And I remember being on the main BBC discussion show when just after that happened, and sure enough, everyone else on the show was talking about their concern about the operation, the malevolence or otherwise of the Navy SEALs for killing bin Laden, and then the appalling ignorance and lack of suitable cultural understanding that might have been demonstrated by this country in potentially not having given the murderer of 3,000 Americans appropriate burial rites. And I was like, have you all lost sight of the plot?
Yeah,
But it's beyond that. It's again, I mean, it's this presumption that so many people have, this presumptuousness, that they would know how to go into Abbottabad in the middle of the night, land the helicopter, enter the bin Laden family compound, ask them all to kindly step this way, not lose your own life, not lose your comrades, and make sure that, I mean, it's just a tiny soupçon. It's a tiny example of something which, when it's applied to Israel, is applied in spades, which is just this endless, I've had a challenge out since the start of this conflict when I've said to people who think that they understand the conflict, think that they, by being, let's just say fanatically anti-Israel, that they are at the heart of this and understand it. I say the same thing. Okay, going back to where we started, 10,000 Americans are stolen today from Manhattan, and they're taken into neighboring New Jersey, and they're dispersed across the territory, and the territory's been built up for 18 years to have an unbelievably complex and intricate and well-dug set of tunnels underneath New Jersey, and all of the hospitals are used as sites for storing weapons, and all of the mosques and all of the schools and all of the UN sites that are there all have tunnel entrances in them and caches of arms and much more. How do you get your 10,000 American hostages out from New Jersey with minimal civilian harm to any innocent civilian in New Jersey? Tell me your plan. Or for that, for that matter, show me your battle plan for how you would have done Gaza after the 7th. How would you have got the 250 hostages back home, and how would you have killed or captured all the leadership of Hamas who were responsible for this and made sure Hamas could not run Gaza again? And I have yet to hear a plan. I hear people saying, I hear people saying things like, well, if you notice the hostage negotiations, the hostage releases have come as a result of negotiation, is something I hear from some people. And you've no idea. It does not come because Hamas wakes up one morning, or the leadership wakes up and decides they'd like to hand back some Israelis today. It happens because of intense military pressure on them, their group, their leadership, and then to buy some time, they occasionally release some emaciated Israelis. And so again, what's anyone else's plan for it? And I don't hear any. I don't actually have many people, I think, who've taken me up on that seriously. And I think it's because they're not serious. They're not actually serious about it.
A lot of people say, well, if Israel would release the Palestinian prisoners that they have, then they would get the hostages back. But I don't remember that ever, first of all, seriously being on the table. It was, we're going to take these prisoners back, and then they're going to join Hamas, and then we're going to do October 7th again. That's what we're going to do. I remember them saying pretty much exactly that.
Yes.
It wasn't you release all our people, we'll release all yours, and then we'll live in peace, and everything will be fine. That was not ever on the table.
No, and the Palestinian prisoners who will be released in the current framework of that's going on as we speak, the 20 or so remaining hostages from Israel who are believed to be alive will be released along with the bodies of around 30 dead Israelis who Hamas and other jihadist groups in Gaza have been holding on to. And just think about that for a second.
Yeah.
Imagine holding a dead body, perhaps for 2 years, because you believe it to be valuable as bartering down the road. That's a pretty sick place to start with. But as you know, these dead bodies and remaining living hostages are due to be released, and I hope to God they are, in exchange for hundreds and hundreds of convicted terrorists. And this is an incredibly bitter pill to swallow because of two things. One, I don't think that an innocent Israeli who has been snatched from a music festival in the early hours of the morning should be deemed to be worth the value of 100 convicted terrorists or people involved in suicide bomb plots and much more. Stabbing attacks randomly in the street of the kind you saw the other day well, not that random, but in Manchester, England. Why should those people be released for these innocent hostages? And just finally on that, and as you know, and as I describe in the book, one of the very, very hard to stomach parts of that is that the man who started this latest conflict, Yahya Sinwar, was himself in an Israeli prison for years for murdering Palestinians with his own hands. That was why the Israelis imprisoned him, throttled to death, including using a kafir, that lovely symbol of terrorist chic that so many young Americans seem to have been caught up with, including throttling all the fear of Palestine. He was imprisoned for this. Yahya Sinwar was released as one of more than 1,000 terrorists in Israeli prisons. He was released in exchange for the one Israeli soldier who had been kidnapped years earlier, Gilad Shalit. So many people on the, as it were, Israeli side of this see that this conflict was started by a man released in just such a prisoner swap, and this conflict seems to be coming to an end with just such a prisoner swap happening again. That is very hard to stomach, and I'm not sure the average American would stomach it if, again, it was America and not Israel that had suffered this barbarism.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there. What do you think about the recognition of a Palestinian state in Canada, the UK, and was it France?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Australia.
And Australia. So functionally, well, let me ask you first what your general thoughts on this are, because to me it seems like, I know they wanted to put pressure on Israel, but I don't understand how this does not reward Hamas for October 7th.
Well, of course it will reward Hamas for October 7th.
Yeah.
And the lesson taken in the region will be that that's how you get stuff out of the Israelis and the Americans and so on. Look, the two-state solution has been the shibboleth of left and right, Republicans, Democrats, Labour, Conservatives, for a couple of generations. And it's the belief that there will be no peace or progression in the Middle East as a region entire unless the Palestinians have another state. And when I say another state, I'm not being as facetious as some people might think. The population of Jordan is mainly Palestinian. Gaza was effectively a Palestinian-run state from 2005 when the last IDF, the last IDF removed the last even bodies of Jews from Jewish cemeteries in Gaza and made the whole of Gaza Judenrein and handed it over to the Palestinians. Yes, Fatah and Hamas, as we were talking about earlier, had a war between them, and Hamas killed their fellow Palestinians by throwing them off buildings and shooting them in the back and much more, dragging their bodies on the back of mopeds and motorbikes through the streets of Gaza. But that was a Palestinian state. It was run by Hamas, horribly run, misgoverned, the subject of unbelievable larceny and theft by the Hamas leadership, who made themselves all billionaires. But it was a Palestinian state. What most people think they mean when they talk about the two-state solution or a Palestinian state is that areas of Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, that are largely Palestinian, inhabited by Palestinians, should move from being what is currently the case, which is that they are run by the Palestinian Authority, to being formally recognized as any other country on earth. This has been the status quo position for a long time, that this is desirable. They never have, and the prime ministers of Canada, France, Britain and Australia have in recent days had no explanation for how you deal with the fact that the Palestinians can't agree on their own leadership, and we don't yet know exactly what's going to happen with running post-war Gaza. The Palestinian Authority did not want to run Gaza. So at best you actually have a three-state solution on the table at some point, which is Gaza run by somebody, Israel, and then a Palestinian named state in part of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. And I don't think at the moment it's particularly desirable, because I think that it would be a reward for October the 7th. I think it would be completely read as that by the Palestinians themselves and their neighbors. But at the very least, not now. But there's so much. People who are watching who haven't spent a lot of their life around politicians or around politicians might have very low opinions of some of them, but you can't have a low enough opinion of certain Western leaders when it comes to this issue, because they simply don't know what they're talking about. They absolutely do not know what they're talking about, and they are dealing in a fantasy that is dead.
Macron started off doing okay. He started off on October 7th being really outspoken, but then when it came time to kind of a year or so on, be like, hey, we're thinking about continuing to prosecute this war. He was, well, I need to find balance. I'm not going to show up to the memorial rally for October 7th victims, and then turns around and recognizes a state. It's just, the whole thing is quite confusing.
Well, there's two quick explanations about Macron, for instance. The first is that it's darkly amusing to me that he rolled out the red carpet for the new leader of Syria, who was a member of an Al-Qaeda affiliate until very recently. And it wasn't in his youth either, so it wasn't like a youthful indiscretion that he joined Al-Qaeda. The new head of Syria, who of course seized power just by brute force, and who's overseen the militias murdering Druze, Christians, and also people from minority Islamic sects in Syria. He had the red carpet rolled out for him at the Elysee the other month in Paris. But the current French government position is that Benjamin Netanyahu cannot set foot on French soil.
I saw that, yeah.
Which is now, this is preposterous to me, but that's just some context. The second thing to say, which is more important, is Macron, Carney, Starmer, and Albanese have all done this unilateral declaration of recognition of a non-existent state, a state that literally does not exist, and whose borders nobody has agreed on, and whose governance nobody knows. They've all done this for one reason, which is domestic political reasons.
Wondered about that.
If I was in Canada again the other week, and if you go to places like Montreal or Toronto, Vancouver, any major city, they are routinely shut down by unbelievably violent, virulent anti-Israel protesters.
I will bring peace to this universe.
I say this because it's sort of still amazing to me as somebody who has perhaps an old-fashioned view of peaceful, nice, decent Canada. Jewish schools repeatedly fired at or firebombed, synagogues repeatedly either shot at or firebombed, Jews attacked.
Perfection.
This is Canada.
But that should not stop us from
and it's
trying to
happened
achieve
because Canada has allowed in a lot of people from Arab and Muslim countries, and they've brought this hatred that we were discussing earlier, these dislikes, these bigotries, they've brought them to Canada, and now they're exercising them on the streets of Canada. That's not all of the protesters at all. That's a very significant chunk of them. Same thing in Britain, same thing in Australia, same thing in France. And if people doubt that or think I'm being cynical or anything like that, just consider the fact that when these leaders all coordinated in order to do this the other day, in order to put pressure on Israel, I mean, it was, Macron even said as much. If you, Israel, don't do what we want, we will declare a Palestinian state. Hell of a way to start a country, isn't it, as a threat? But the country that didn't do that in that moment was Italy. Giorgia Meloni did not join in. That she thought it was the wrong thing to do and would risk rewarding terrorists. There were immediately not just protests but riots, smashing up of shops, and much more in Milan, because Meloni had not recognized the Palestinian state. That's what all these other leaders know they're facing domestically. They know that. Consider the fact that in the UK, where I'm from, we're speaking a few days after a terrorist called Jihad was decided to go and murder Jews on the festival of Yom Kippur in Manchester. In the wake of that, the Starmer government in the UK asked, for the first time ever, certainly the first time in 2 years, asked the planned anti-Israel protests 2 days later not to go ahead because it was a request, it was not an order. they made a polite request that they rethink the next day's, 2 days later, protest on this occasion because police were needed to up security at other synagogues, Jewish schools, other Jewish sites across the country, and the Jews in the UK, having just been the target of such a terrible attack, might be feeling intimidated by thousands of people again turning out on the streets calling for intifada, particularly globalized intifada, one of their favorite chants. And the organizers of the protest said, no, we're going ahead. Now that's, as I'm fond of pointing out, because it's important, that's not Israel's problem, that's Britain's problem. You know, if your synagogues and Jewish schools and yeshivas and so on are not safe in Canada, that is not Israel's problem, that's Canada's problem. And so on in each of these countries. But the trend for many years has been to not face up to problems that are difficult. And again, there's an obvious reason.
Functionally, what does recognizing a Palestinian state do? Because there's no elections, there's no government, there's no borders, really.
No, it does nothing.
So can they, if we have this huge problem in the United States or Canada, Australia, France, these governments theoretically could end up much more right-wing if people decide that they're sick of this kind of thing. I mean, the Muslim population is probably, I'm going to guess, mostly moderate in its single-digit number. Eventually, people are going to, I would think, end up shifting to the right and electing a government that says, oh, if you want to protest this and shoot at a synagogue, we're just going to deport you or something. I mean, you're going to end up with more and more right-wing governments. Yeah. Can you unrecognize a state? How does that work?
Yes, it's like not believing in Santa Claus.
And two, do you agree, or is my prediction feasible that these governments might end up shifting significantly to the right?
Yes, yeah, more than feasible.
There's still
more
so
than
much
feasible.
to do.
They're making it almost inevitable. And by the way, you know, all of this stuff is hell all the way down, as I said at the beginning. But you know, there was a poll carried out last year, and I think on the anniversary of the 7th of October, so that most British Muslims don't believe that Hamas carried out atrocities on 7th of October 2023.
Is that credible? That's insane.
Yes. The majority of them don't think Hamas did anything wrong.
I hate hearing that. I'd like to think...
Not good, is it?
No, because look, I went to school in Michigan, like I said, and there's all these... I was friends with tons of Muslim kids. They were all like nice and reasonable, and you know, I didn't have to hide that I was Jewish, and I'm still friends with a lot of them. I don't think that they would say, "Oh, that didn't happen."
Well, you know, my friend Eric Weinstein gave me a useful hack for this some years ago, which is to point out, if you don't think that Islam has a problem of fundamentalism, you don't have enough Muslim friends. Mm-hmm. Because if you do have Muslim friends, you will know this is something they know. And something which is a very lively and difficult thing going on in their community. And I've always had the same view. It's time that they sort their darn house out. You know, we all have problems in our communities, in different religions. We all have problems. We've all had big problems in our past at some point, sometimes for a very long time. But you cannot tell me that if there was a sect of the Mormon Church that was going around preaching the killing of another minority, we would expect our Mormon friends to face down that group.
That's true.
And sure, there are crazy Christians, there are some crazy Jews, there are some crazy atheists, and all this is, yeah, okay. But we would expect, at the moment that violence was normalized, even by a single-digit percentage, or approved of by a low double-digit percentage of people, you would expect that group, whoever it was, to confront it head on and to say, no, we're not doing this. So why does that not happen more? And why is it that instead people have charges of Islamophobia and of far-right bigotry or of racism and so on? And I'm afraid it's to be my kindest in the interpretation of this. It's a demonstration that, like so many other groups and religions and sects, the Muslim world does not want to air its dirty laundry in public. It does not want to have this discussion publicly. It does not want to have it in particular with non-Muslims, and it wants it to go away, and it wants to demonize anyone who prays to it, including Muslims.
Interesting.
So, you know, I mean, we saw how long it took, for instance, for the child sex abuse scandals in the Catholic Church to come out because of the unwillingness of some people right up the top of the hierarchy in the clergy to allow the church to be dragged through what was going to happen if this came out. And we had, you know, we know the decades of cover-up.